Today I'll show how Apica Flow can reduce Kubernetes log volume by roughly 75%. Right now, every log is sent downstream and indexed, even though much of it is just noise, health checks, debug messages, duplicates, and unnecessary Kubernetes metadata. Flow removes that noise before it reaches your observability platform, reducing costs while preserving the logs that matter. Let's take a look. Here in Ascent, I'm opening the Kubernetes log stream. We can see logs coming in across different severities: info, warning, debug, and error. If I click into one of these events, you can see that the log contains a lot of fields. Some are useful, like the message, status code, service, and timestamp. But there are also a lot of fields that are repeated on every event or are not very useful for day-to-day troubleshooting. For example, fields like pod start time, replica set name, pod template hash, image tag, and other Kubernetes metadata can add a lot of volume without adding much operational value. This is exactly where Apica Flow helps. Instead of sending every field and every log downstream, we can apply rules directly in the pipeline to clean up the data before it reaches a more expensive indexed platform like Splunk, Datadog, or new Relic. Now let's move into the pipeline view. This view shows how data is flowing through Apica Flow and which rules are applied to the stream. Right now, the rules are turned off, so the logs are coming through as is. I'm going to select the Kubernetes namespace so we can watch the logs update live as the rules are applied. The first thing we'll do is remove unnecessary labels and fields. Apica makes this simple with a filter rule. In the rule configuration, I can select which labels I want to drop from the event. These fields are automatically populated from the log we selected, so I can quickly choose the fields that are not needed. Once I enable this rule, we can immediately see the log become cleaner. The unnecessary Kubernetes metadata is removed, and the event is easier to read. Next, we can go a step further and drop entire logs that are not useful. A common example is health check traffic. If the path is /healths, /readyz, or /metrics, and the request is successful, that usually just tells us the service is alive. That information is already tracked elsewhere in Kubernetes and monitoring systems. These logs can be extremely high volume, so dropping them from the expensive indexed tier can create immediate savings. Now I'll enable that rule as well. Next, let's look at debug logs and duplicate events. Debug logs are useful during active troubleshooting, but they are usually not something you want to index all day, every day in production. With Flow, we can deduplicate those events. For example, in a 1-minute window, we can keep one copy for reference and drop the repeated copies. This gives us the context we need without paying to store hundreds or thousands of nearly identical messages. We can also deduplicate events based on fields like application, message, and logger. This is especially useful during error storms, where the same issue repeats over and over again. Instead of indexing every duplicate event, Flow can keep one event and preserve the count, so we still know how many times it happened without storing every single copy. The next rule is focused on sensitive data. If these logs contain emails, social security numbers, tokens, or other sensitive values, we can mask or rewrite those fields before the data is stored or forwarded downstream. This is important because once sensitive data lands in an observability platform, it may be replicated, retained, searched, or exported. By redacting it in the pipeline, we reduce that risk before the data persists anywhere. Now that the rules are enabled, we can see the logs becoming much cleaner. Unnecessary fields are gone. Low-value events are being dropped. Duplicate events are being reduced. And sensitive values are being masked. Once the pipeline is saved, we can return to the search results and look at the transformed data. Now, when we inspect the logs, they're much easier to digest. Instead of large events filled with repeated metadata, we're left with the fields that actually matter for troubleshooting. We can also see that more of what remains is higher value data, like warnings and errors, rather than low-value informational noise. From here, Apica gives us flexibility in where the data goes. You can store data in Apica's data lake for search, dashboards, alerting, audit, and compliance use cases. Or if you prefer to use Apica Flow strictly as a telemetry pipeline, you can forward the cleaned data to platforms like Splunk, Datadog, New Relic, and many other observability destinations. The Forwarders tab highlights some of the integrations we support out of the box. Combined with the flexibility of Flow, this gives you complete control over where your data goes and how it's routed. For example, lower value logs could be stored in a lower cost destination, while warnings, errors, and critical application events are routed to your primary observability platform. Now let's visualize the pipeline. Here we can see the source, the rules being applied, and the destinations receiving the data. We can also see the impact those rules are having on overall volume. In this example, Flow is reducing Kubernetes log volume by 81%. Most organizations don't have a logging problem, they have a noise problem. Apica Flow helps eliminate that noise before it becomes cost, complexity, and compliance risk, ensuring you only pay to store and analyze the data that actually matters.